Welcome to this week's First Chapter Friday. For this week's edition, we're going to listen to The Shadows on the Mountain from the Curse of the Sandtongue Bravelands series by Erin Hunter. So sit back, relax, and use your imagination as we read the first chapter of this new book. Prologue. Currents of warm air lifted Freewing, the martial eagle, raising her so far above the plains of Bravelands, she could see it all. The distant mountains in the west, the forests that wound with the silver rivers, the eastern lakes that had bordered the sweeping grass plains. The sky was cloudless today, the air crystal clear, and the golden land below Freewing was clear to her keen, dark eyes. The herds thrived. Masses of wild beasts, buffalo, and zebras moved below her, following their ancient migration paths. Rivers and lakes glittered in the high noonday sun. Freewing saw the smudged gray line of an elephant family trekking northward and a spattering of yellow dots that were a grazing herd of gazelles. But she would not find her prey on the plains, not today. She had cared for her chick for long weeks, rarely leaving their nest of sticks high in a solitary fever tree. Now Storm Rider's baby down was almost gone, replaced by feathers, and it would not be long till he began to stretch his young wings and grow into his name. It was Freewing's time to hunt again, and she had taken gladly to the skies. Her mate, Strongbeak, would guard both nest and chick until she returned with her promised treat, a monitor lizard. There was only one place she knew where such a prize was guaranteed: the slopes of the rock that touches the sky. Tilting her feather tips, Freewing gazed toward the great eastern mountain, towering misty blue in the distance over the savannah. As she soared toward it, its color became darker, greener, till she could make out each individual tree in the forest that swathed its peaks and gullies. Ridges of pale rock jutted from its thick shroud of foliage, and sloping boulders. It was one of them that she saw that she was searching for. The spotted brown lizard basked on the flat stone in a patch of sun, between a narrow creek and a dark cave in the rocks. Its tongue flicked lazily, not the largest lizard Freewing had ever caught, but more than big enough to feed hungry eagles, and she could carry this one home easily to her mate and her chick. Thanks be to the Great Spirit. She was very high still. The lizard would never know what killed it. Tightening her wings closer to her body, adjusting her tail feathers, Freewing swooped out of the sun. How good it felt! This headlong downward dive, the cool wind racing across her feathers. She was close now, and the flat rock was rushing toward her. She extended her talons to grasp her sleepy prey, and was engulfed in a cloud of blackness that sent her spiraling out of control. She flapped desperately, trying to regain her balance. A multitude of tiny creatures whirled around her. There were so many of them, she could no longer see rock or tree or creek, let alone lizard. The air itself seemed to churn, sparking panic in her beast. She gasped, trying to dodge free of the shrill, shrinking horde. how she hated them, and that abomination of a language, spy tongue warped by hissing grass tongue. In the chaos of the air around her, it took Freewing long moments to find her composure. At last, beating her wings strongly, she burst out of the throng and flapped toward the nearest branch. She perched there, trembling with fury, as the storm of tiny black wings passed. Of course, the bats were not attacking her. They were not even interested in her. But what had possessed them to flee their dingy tunnels in the daytime? Freewing caught only snatches of their speaking hisses. But there was little to be learned anyway. There was only fear and desperation in their voices. Fly, fly, quick, quick, be swift, Silverfang, swift and far, soar far away. Bewildered, Freewing watched as the cloud of bats dwindled in the distance beyond a forested ridge of the mountain. Doubting even her own eyes, she glanced at the sky. No, the sun was still high. What could drive them into the midday sunlight? What were they so scared of? She turned her head and gazed with curiosity at the cave mouth by the rocks. But even her powerful eyes could not penetrate the blackness. As she stared, the very stillness of the black maw made a new trepidation stir inside her. Something cold rippled through her body, and for a moment she could not move. Freewing turned back to the lizard. It had not been frightened away by the bats, nor by Freewing herself, even though it now clearly knew that she was there. Its yellow eyes met hers, and they were filled with... What was that look? Was it mockery? Something in the lizard's nonchalant gaze chilled Freewing's blood. It should have fled at first glimpse of her, yet it perched there unafraid, almost daring her to attack. The heavy dread was swamped by fear, and she spread her wings and flapped into the air once again. Besides, even if that lizard offered itself to her belly up, she would not return for it. Freewing shuddered as she flew higher and faster into the sky. Something lurked in the black cave. It must never emerge. Freewing knew that with the deepest instincts in her body. She would find today's prey on the savannah after all, far from that unseen presence and the dark, oozing evil it breathed into the air of the Bravelands. Chapter 1. Bramble Greenback, sitting on the branch of an ironwood tree, rubbed his back lazily against the fissured bark behind him. It was an idle sort of day, but then all Gramble's days were idle. That was just how he liked it. It was easy for a young gorilla to pass his time in the forest. There were so many distractions to enjoy, so many pranks to play beneath the cover of the dense green canopy. Grinning, he parted the twigs with his finger and peered down through the glossy green leaves. Yes, Groundnut Blackback was still sitting there at the foot of the ironwood, glancing in perplexity from side to side and looking grumpy. Groundnut wasn't that bright for a senior gorilla. He should have worked out long ago where the tiny missiles were coming from. Bramble pulled another fistful of little black fruits from their stalk. Nibbling his tongue in concentration, he leaned down and dropped them. Bang! They hit the crown of Groundnut's head perfectly. The old gorilla gave a growl of frustration and rubbed his head, craning back to peer angrily into the tree. But Bramble had already shrunk behind the foliage, barely able to keep from stifling his giggles. The branch beneath Bramble jerked and swayed a little, and he glanced up to see his half-sister, Moonflower, had swung over from the neighboring tree. She approached him carefully, a mango clutched in her hand as she negotiated the leafy boughs. "Bramble, what are you up to now?" "I can't think what you mean," said Bramble, widening his eyes in shock and innocence. "You know perfectly well. Don't you ever get tired of teasing poor Groundnut?" "Never." Bramble grinned mischievously. "Don't be mad at me, Moonflower. I'm very good at making my own entertainment." His eyes drifted to the mango in Moonflower's grip. So velvety and red and gold that he couldn't help licking his lips. "I can't ever be mad at you," she offered the mango, smiling indulgently. "You want it, little brother?" "Yes, I do." Bramble reached out to take it from her, and she dropped it into his waiting palm. Or she tried to. Bramble, half his focus still on the grumbling groundnut below, wasn't paying enough attention. The mango slipped from his palm. "Oh, no!" he gasped, snatching wildly for the lost mango. But it was no use. It bounced down through the foliage, falling jerkily toward the earth. He stared down, feeling his loss grow along with his anxiety as it plummeted farther and farther. It wouldn't hit Groundnut. It wouldn't. With a last wild bounce from a forked branch, the mango dropped straight onto Groundnut's patchy furred head. It shattered on impact. "Well, that was a ripe one," remarked Moonflower. Groundnut surged up from the ground, roaring in anger and thumping his chest. He spun around and reared upright to stare into the tree. Yellow pulp slid and dripped down the big gorilla's face and snout. But Bramble didn't even have time to snigger. There certainly wasn't time to hide. Groundnut's glittering eyes had already locked with his. "Oh, no," growled Bramble. "You!" bellowed Groundnut. Reaching up, he seized branches in both fists and shook them violently. The whole tree began to sway as he tore and yanked at its lower boughs. "Whoa!" exclaimed Moonflower, tottering where she stood. "We're doomed," blurted Bramble. He grabbed at a branch, missed, and toppled sideways. The fall down through the branches was a series of painful thuds, but the sheer humiliation was worse. Bramble hit the grass rump first with a yelp. Moonflower was just a moment behind him. She jumped to her feet, unhurt, and grabbed his arm. "Run!" Twisting, she slammed her hands knuckle first into the soft forest loam and lopped away on all fours. Bramble had to duck before he could run to dodge Groundnut's wild grab. But as soon as he was free and clear, he bolted after Moonflower. The big gorilla gave chase, but half-heartedly, and he halted after a few bounding paces, panting. "You insolent little monkey," bellowed Groundnut, slamming his fist into the ground. I'll tell your father, Burbark Silverback, about this. Just you see if I don't." "Tell him whatever you like," yelled Bramble cheekily. "I'm not scared." He kept lopping at top speed all the same, following Moonflower as she charged through a group of peacefully grooming goldbacks. The females glanced up in irritation but made no attempt to stop the two youngsters. "He's given up," barked Bramble to his half-sister when they were clear of the goldbacks. "Groundnut gave up ages ago." A huge fist clamped around his hind foot, swinging him into the air. His heart lurched as the forest flipped upside down. But it wasn't Groundnut who held him by the ankle. "Cassava, Brightback, let me go!" Bramble wiggled and flapped his arms ineffectually. "Put me down, you big lunk!" "Not till you tell me what you've been up to, you young scoundrel." Cassava's face was fierce and stern, as befitted the heir to the troop's leadership. But his eyes twinkled. They always did. "Absolutely nothing at all." Still upside down, Bramble folded his arms and pouted at his older brother. Gently, his brother set him down, upright on the forest floor. "Well, behave yourself. You're 3 years old, young gorilla. You should be learning responsibility." "I'm very responsible," Bramble insisted. "Yes, you're very responsible for all the mischief around here," growled Cassava. "Go on, then. Get along with you. And don't venture far from the nest at this time of the evening." "Don't worry about me." Bramble reared up and pounded his chest grandly with his fists. "I'm as strong as any creature on this mountain. Haven't you seen the silver hairs coming through my back?" He twisted and pointed over his shoulder to show Cassava. There was silence behind him. Bramble craned his head around to look at his brother, who had leaned close to peer and frown and scratch his head. As Bramble gave an indignant grunt, Cassava leaned even closer, pressing his snout right against Bramble's back. "Nope," came Cassava's muffled voice. "Can't make 'em out at all." Moonflower laughed as Bramble slapped his brother away. Cassava was grinning. "Moonflower, your mother was looking for you," said the older gorilla. "Was she? I'll go find her." Moonflower smiled. "Bye, you two." She lopped off through the trees. "Oh, thanks very much, Cassava," grumbled Bramble. "Moonflower and I were having great fun. We were livening up everyone's day. That's all." "Nobody needs their day livened like that. Just thank the Great Spirit for a quiet life." Cassava swiped affectionately at the top of Bramble's head. "You could have all the excitement of the plains instead, you know. Starvation, floods, being chased by crocodiles, or eaten by lions." "I could handle a lion," sniffed Bramble. "Ha! Have you ever even seen one?" Bramble glowered at his brother. "Well, no." "They're terrifying." Cassava's eyes widened and he spread his paws wide. His fingers hooked into pretend claws. Golden like the sun and twice the size of gorillas. They have manes as of black fur and tails that sting, and burning red eyes, and long pointed tusks. Bramble shuddered. He wasn't so sure anymore that he really wanted a showdown with a lion. "Tusks and a stinger?" "Yep," Cassava nodded. "They're dangerous at both ends." He rubbed Bramble's head affectionately. "If you want something useful to do, young gorilla, you could go see our father at his nest and take him some fruit." Isn't he busy? Bramble wrinkled his snout. He doesn't like being interrupted when he's busy. Cassava shook his head, looking suddenly more serious. Father hasn't been himself lately. I think he'd appreciate your company. He passed Bramble a bunch of green bananas, then winked knowingly. But no dropping them on his head, okay? Bramble grinned ruefully. I won't. He crept through the trees toward his father's nest. Bramble loved his father, of course, but he was in awe of him too. When Burbark was in a good mood and feeling tolerant, there was nobody Bramble would rather talk to. But Bramble had had many a snap or swiped paw when he disturbed Burbark at the wrong moment. As Bramble pushed through the last of the foliage, he saw that his father had his back turned. Burbark was staring out into the forest, his massive shoulders hunched slightly. Bramble would never stop being impressed by the vastness and strength of that muscular back, with its gleaming silver hair. Bramble came to a halt, digging his knuckles into the forest litter. He felt pride swell in his chest. He might not be the bright back and heir, future protector of the troop, as Cassava was, but he was still the son of this magnificent leader. Burbark seemed very still and focused, and as Bramble crept closer, he heard his father muttering to himself under his breath. He wasn't sure Cassava had been right. Maybe he should turn around and go back the way he'd come. No, that was ridiculous. His father was alone, so he clearly wasn't preoccupied with troop business or discussions. Father, Bramble said. Burbark did not immediately turn, and Bramble frowned in uncertainty. Usually, the Burbark would shout about in delight and give his younger son a grin, even while scolding him for the disturbance. After long moments, Burbark's shoulders twitched, and the muttering stopped abruptly. Burbark twisted his head and blinked at Bramble. Then he swung around. His dark eyes were glazed and distant, and he said nothing. Suddenly nervous, Bramble crept forward and laid the green bananas at his father's feet. Still, Burbark did not move. He just scratched at his wrist, where a small snake had bitten him a few days before. How is the troop? Asked Burbark vaguely. On another day, Bramble might have mentioned the incident with the mango, but his father seemed in no mood for jokes now. He barely seemed there at all. I guess he has important business on his mind after all? Very well, he replied. I brought you something to eat, father. Burbark cast an eye at the bananas, but then he looked away, scratching his arm once more. The flesh looked raw and painful, and Bramble was surprised that it hadn't yet healed. It was a sore that had done in his mother, starting at a nasty gash from a splintered branch, but worsening until she could no longer keep her food down. His father and older brother hadn't let him see her near the end, but he remembered her groans of pain through the trees as the goldbacks tended to her. He tried to talk to the Great Spirit to beg for his mother's life, but she had died anyway. Why don't you ask one of the goldbacks to look at your arm? He said. Huh? A silverback can't go running to the goldbacks like an infant every time he gets a scratch. Burbark scowled. I must show myself to be strong for the sake of the troop. You'll learn that one day. Feeling a trickle of hot shame in his gut, Bramble nodded. Yes, father, I know. You're right. Burbark at last cracked half a smile. I am always right, Bramble. Yes, he was, thought Bramble, and despite his boast to Cassava and Moonflower, Bramble couldn't imagine ever being a powerful and confident silverback like his father. Barbark was still watching him in silence. He was clearly not in the mood for a chat. Whatever Cassava had said, Bramble dipped his head. "I'll go then." Barbark nodded. He turned again to stare into the forest, but as Bramble began to turn away, he glanced back over his shoulder. "Thank you for the bananas," he muttered. A little deflated, Bramble padded back toward the rest of the troop. Life as the Silverback certainly wasn't all fun and bossing other gorillas around. He felt bad for his father, so preoccupied with protecting the troop that he could never relax and take things easy. "And I'm actually quite glad I'm not the Brightback," he admitted to himself. It was Cassava who would take over all those weighty responsibilities, not him. Poor Cassava. It would be nice if he could be of some help to his brother, and to his father for that matter, but what could he do? Well, you could start to practice being a troop defender instead of playing games all the time. And with no enemies in sight, he could always try out his moves on something smaller. Glancing from side to side as he plodded on, Bramble suddenly spotted the red and yellow flash of a lovebird, pecking around for seeds on the forest floor. Furrowing his brow, he gave a throaty growl. He slammed his fists into the earth and then bared his fangs. "Hey, you! I'm a lion! See my tusks? You better run!" The bird gave him a sidelong glance and, looking not terribly nervous, fluttered away a little distance. Bramble prowled after it. Irritated, the lovebird hopped and flapped away, and he followed, hunching his shoulders and tossing an imaginary mane. The lovebird gave a whistle of annoyance and fluttered away again, but Bramble was having far too much fun to stop. He raised his head, swung what he imagined were terrifying, blood-stained tusks, and gave a roar. The bird glared at him across a small clearing. "I've got you now," grumbled Bramble. He leaped across the glade and collided in mid-air with a pale, furry shape that sprang from the trees below. Shocked, Bramble thudded to the ground with the spotted yellow creature. Their limbs tangled together, while the lovebird flew away with a trill of what sounded like laughter. The yellow creature gave a yowl of shock and kicked away from Bramble, then lowered itself into a menacing crouch. The young gorilla scrambled hurriedly to his feet and faced his attacker. Panting, they both stared at each other. "A real lion," was his first panicked thought. It wasn't quite as Cassava had described it. It had no mane and no tusks, and when he glanced fearfully at its lashing tail, he could see no stinger. It was a lot smaller than he expected, but he was quite sure this was the closest thing to a lion he'd ever seen. Trembling, Bramble raised himself up on his hind feet and bared his teeth. The creature hunched its shoulders and exposed its own long, dangerous fangs. "What do you think you're doing?" she snarled. "You got in the way of my hunt. Don't you know it's almost nightfall? You should be safe in your nest, scratching your fleas." "Me? Look at you," Bramble bristled. "No ugly old patchy furred lions telling me what to do." "Lion?" She gave a harsh coughing sound. "I'm a leopard. Lions don't live on the mountain, you fool. They're afraid too." She laughed again. "Oh, a leopard. Oh, I knew that," he blurted. She was circling now, slow and menacing. Bramble circled too, his fists slamming into the ground, keeping the leopard's yellow fangs in view. "You did not know that," she taunted him. "You've never even seen a leopard before, have you?" "So what? I bet you've never seen a gorilla." "Ha ha, I see gorillas all the time." "They're always snoring because their eyes don't work at night. Leopards live in the night. The darkness is our home." "That just means you're too scared to show your faces in the day," grunted Bramble. "Poor sensitive things." Her lip curled. "We hunt in the night because our eyes are so much better than yours. 1,000 times better than the eyes of a stinky gorilla." Bramble sucked in a breath. He couldn't think of a witty comeback soon enough. "You're stinky," he snapped. "Pfft, I am Chase, born of Prow, and I hunt tonight to support my family. You're nothing but a cub, a baby." "I am Bramble." Provoked, he blurted it out before he could help himself. "Bramble Silverback." "Silverback!" Her eyes widened and she tried to peer behind him. "I thought silverbacks were grown-up leaders." Something cracked in the bushes behind him, and Bramble twisted around in shock as he heard a high snarl. "More leopards? Is it a pack?" Shadows flickered between the trees, and brown and black shapes emerged from the twilight forest. A whole clan of young hyenas. Their yellow eyes glittered in the shady light, and they licked their jaws as they prowled forward, ragged ears flickering. Bramble felt his heart stutter. He backed away as they approached with wide grins, their hackles bristling. Bramble's movement brought him closer to Chase, born of Prow, and he eyed her nervously. But there were more of the hyenas, and right now they looked a lot scarier than Chase did. "Ah," said the oldest looking hyena, tilting its head and licking its jaws. "Two babies, tender and delicate." The hyena behind him sniggered. "Far from home. Yum." "Gorilla and leopard go well together," a third said. The leopard snarled, narrowing her eyes. She spun so swiftly, Bramble barely saw the movement. Then she sprang up into the nearest tree, clawing her way up the trunk till she reached the first and thickest branch. She glared down at the hyenas, growling, then padded away onto the leaves. "Oh well," said the leader, hunching its shoulders. "One left anyway." All Bramble could do was leap for the same tree as the leopard, but his movements were slower, his frantic scramble clumsier. He could barely hang on the bark. He didn't have claws like the leopards. As his heart raced with terror and he clung desperately to the trunk, he felt an abrupt bolt of pain explode in his leg. With a howl, he jerked at his leg, but it was held fast in the teeth of the biggest hyena. Panic surged inside his chest, and he screeched and yelled in desperation. The hyenas hollered in excitement. Their leader bit more deeply into Bramble's leg. All its paws were off the ground, and its weight was dragging him. The branch Bramble clung to was creaking and cracking. Soon he would fall, he knew, and they would tear him apart. It was over, and so soon. Cold fear flowed through his arms, making Bramble's grip weaken even as he struggled to cling on. He wanted to scream for his troop. "Cassava, help me! Father!" But the words wouldn't come. His throat was too constricted, the pain too dizzying. "Father, they'll never know what happened to me." That completes this week's First Chapter Friday, Shadows on the Mountain by Erin Hunter. Stop by the library to pick up the book to find out what happens to Bramble. Does he escape the hyenas? Or stop by the library for another book as we finish up our summer reading. Thanks for joining us this week. I hope you join us again.